meteorologist Gary Best.
Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
It's an Ostrower Tuesday, and Dr. Gary Ostrower is with us today in the studio. Thank you for coming in.
Hey, nice to be here as usual.
Well, I use Yahoo for one of my emails, Dr. Ostrower, and the big story that I kept seeing yesterday in Yahoo News and it's other places as well, is that Senate Republican leader, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he'll take up the impeachment, and there will be a trial if the House proceeds to have one.
Well, look, there may be some progress here. First of all, I think it's worth mentioning that there was some good news yesterday, and there's not a lot of good news these days. And the good news that I read was that Representative Chris Collins from the Buffalo area, is resigning from the House of Representatives, and I think we call that draining the swamp. It is, I think, notable that he was the very first Republican to endorse, from Congress at least, to endorse, Republican from New York State, to endorse Donald Trump when Trump ran for president in 2016. The fellow's a crook. It would appear that he is, we don't know whether he's already been indicted. We don't know whether he'll be convicted. So maybe I should say he's an alleged crook, because there may not have been a final disposition of this. On the other hand, for all I know, they may have some kind of a plea bargain agreement, in which case he is resigning from Congress. But I think it's good to have him out. He comes from a very Republican area of the state, and I think there's every good reason to think that the person who replaces him in Congress will again be a Republican. But I think that, Collins, from my perspective, should have been gone a long, long time ago. And so far as Mitch McConnell is concerned, he's a majority leader. He controls, if you will, the agenda of the Senate. But the Constitution is really very, very clear in respect to the impeachment proceeding. The House of Representatives may vote articles of impeachment. If they do, then there will be a trial in the Senate. And the Senate has no choice on this one. They have to have the trial. Whether it's smart for the Democrats to go the impeachment route is something else. There's a lot of dissension, I think, even within the Democratic Party. And I think you're probably aware that the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Democrat Nancy Pelosi from California, has been very, very reluctant to commit the Democrats to impeachment. And the reason is that she fears it may, in a sense, rebound against the Democrats. It may leave them even weaker than they were before. And I want to remind listeners that when Bill Clinton was impeached at the end of the last century, he was impeached. Then, of course, there was a trial in the Senate. The trial failed. 55 voted not to convict him. 45 senators voted to convict him. And as a result of that, and not only the actual, the vote, he wound up more popular than he had been beforehand. And I think that Nancy Pelosi is worried that that could happen with Donald Trump, that many Americans will view the impeachment proceedings as kind of a distraction from the election. And of course, Trump is saying, and his friends on Fox News are saying, that this is an attempt to overturn, kind of a coup d'etat, an attempt, in other words, to reverse the results of the 2016 election. But on the other hand, the evidence is increasingly clear that Trump has committed a series of illegal acts, impeachable acts. And I thought that one of the most important statements was made by 7 Democratic female representatives, people who had all won an election in an otherwise Republican-leaning district in 2018. These are all women who have either served in the intelligence community or, even more importantly, in the military community. And I want to read something that's that these women said collectively in their own statement when they went from a position of not supporting impeachment to a position of supporting impeachment. And they said that our lives have been defined by national service. We are not career politicians. We are veterans of the military and of the nation's defense and intelligence agencies. Our service, they went on to say, is rooted in the defense of our country on the front lines of national security. We have devoted our lives, they say again, to the service and security of the country. And throughout our careers, we have sworn oaths to defend the Constitution of the United States many times over. Now we join as a unified group to uphold that oath as we enter uncharted waters and face unprecedented allegations against President Trump. And then they went on to say something about those allegations, not the least of which is that the president may have used his position to pressure a foreign country into investigating a political opponent. And he sought to use U.S. taxpayer dollars as a leverage to use it. And they're referring there, of course, to the fact that Trump withheld $381 billion of aid to Ukraine, allegedly so that the Ukrainians would investigate Joe Biden, his political opponent. And then these women went on to say the following. These allegations are stunning, both in the national security threat they pose and the potential corruption that they represent. These allegations, if true, we believe these actions represent an impeachable offense. We do not arrive at this conclusion lightly, and we call on our colleagues in Congress to consider the use of the congressional authorities available to us. And they're referring, of course, to the impeachment provisions of the Constitution. That's serious stuff, and I think that one has to take this very, very seriously. To simply dismiss this as some kind of partisan warfare, I think really, really misses the point. If there's any partisan warfare, it's coming out of the White House, not out of the Congress right now.
On impeachment, and this is on the impeachment process, couple things. Governor Andrew Cuomo put out he didn't put out a statement. He was giving an interview. And he said that Nancy Pelosi he admired for holding out as long as Nancy Pelosi could against the influence of the squad. Governor Cuomo maintains impeachment isn't going to go anywhere because the Senate's not going to discipline Trump when it comes down to it. Then on the old Bill Clinton case, it's kind of interesting. I had Dr. Heineman on last Friday, as we always do. And I said to him, What do you think about the chances of this being kind of political retribution for the way Bill Clinton was treated? And Heineman said Newt Gingrich is a nasty guy, and he was then, and he was too hard on Bill Clinton, and it backfired. Basically, summing up what Heineman said, which you said earlier in the show today.
Well, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, what no one thought, and obviously there was plenty of momentum toward impeachment even 3 weeks ago or so. I don't think that any of us had imagined that the president would wind up being accused by a whistleblower, a very, very credible whistleblower. And I'm going to divert myself just for one moment here. I'm going to come back exactly to the point I was going to make. But that whistleblower, if you listen to Fox News, if you listen to the president, they're saying he's partisan, but then they don't know who he is. So of course they don't know whether he's really partisan. And then they say, he got secondhand information. It's all hearsay. But the fact of the matter is that, and I want to read from his letter, from his complaint. In the course of my official duties, I have received information from multiple U.S. government officials that the president is using the power of his office to solicit interference from a foreign country. And he goes on to say again and again that this information comes from multiple sources. And now we're beginning to discover that Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, he may have been in on the phone call. The information was so credible, was so believable, that the White House then took the transcript of this and they put it where? They put it into a special kind of a hiding place, a computer, in other words, that is used for only very, very top secret national security kinds of matters, even though, in fact, this was a political act by the president rather than the opposite. But in either case, let me go back to the point that you're making. there are an awful lot of people who will stand with the president no matter what he did. If he broke the law, that's okay with them. If he shoots someone on Fifth Avenue, that's okay with them. If he is corrupt, and he's using his own office for his own, personal economic financial gain, well, that's okay with them. And unfortunately, that's the world that we live in right now. And the Republican Party increasingly has kind of, simply fallen in step behind the president. And where in 1974, the Republicans in the Senate ultimately said to President Nixon, look, we believe that you have committed impeachable crimes and we're going to vote to convict. And of course, the president resigned on that basis. But the Republicans are not standing up at this point. Some are. A few are, here and there. There's a Republican by the name of Peter Werner who served in the last 3 Republican administrations. And he says of Trump that he's an extreme narcissist. He's pathologically dishonest. He is shameless. He's a man who delights in flouting norms. He has a mobster's mentality. Okay, his behavior isn't governed by moral standards and so forth. But how many other Republicans are willing to stand up and say that, even though it's quite clear that that this kind of description is correct? He says, why Mr. Trump? He says, an ethical wreck of a man, both before and after the White House, has earned such loyalty from Republicans, he says, is a mystery. And I agree, it is a mystery. I think it's a very sad moment when really good Republicans, people who do have a moral background, like our own congressman, have not been willing to stand up and saying enough is enough.
You talked for a moment about how the conservatives feel about President Trump and impeachment. I think it's safe to say that the liberals are saying, impeach, impeach. The conservatives kind of roll their eyes and say this is all the Democrats have done since he got there. They're not really even, I wouldn't say they're not paying attention, but they don't take seriously any new accusation. Where do you think the middle ground people stand in America?
Well, the middle ground may be beginning to shift, and we really don't know this exactly. There's no question that, at least according to public opinion polls, the Quinnipiac poll most recently, just yesterday, shows a significant shift toward support for impeachment. But that shift is about 52% in favor of impeachment and 48% opposed. Now, again, 4 weeks ago, it was 10 points the other direction, people not wanting to impeach. Now, will that shift continue? I doubt it. I mean, I think that there's going to be a narrow majority in favor of impeachment. And you may even have, for all I know, a narrow majority in the Senate in favor of impeachment. Former Senator Jeff Flake, a very conservative Republican, kind of almost a libertarian, said this morning in an op-ed in the Washington Post that it's time for the Republicans to stand up and do the right thing. It's time for the Republicans to, show that they have some moral backbone. But the fact of the matter is that most Republicans in the Senate are not going to do this, at least right now. Now, we may get other things. We may learn yet other things that we haven't yet learned. And more Republicans, White House officials, former White House officials, perhaps people like General Mattis and General McMaster may come out of the closet, so to speak, on these issues and throw their weight behind impeachment. If that happens, there may be a shift, but it's important, again, read your Constitution. You got to understand that it's going to take a 2/3 vote in the Senate, not a simple majority, but a 2/3 vote in the Senate to convict the president and to force him out of office. And one more thing I want to mention about this, and that is that the president yesterday quoted I guess it was some pastor, some very, very, religious supporter of his, and said that there would be a civil war in the event that Trump is removed from office. The fact that Trump is quoting these people, the fact that he is kind of, almost encouraging this sort of thing, I feel itself is an impeachable offense. It's a high crime. And I think it tells you something about the degree to which that Trump is a disfigured man and that the Republican Party has been morally disfigured by his actions and by the degree to which Republicans are supporting him right now. And I say this, remember, Brian, I've been a Republican for the last 50 years. I think it's very sad as to what's happened to my own political party.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment with Dr. Gary Ostrower.
The DJ you should hire listens to you about the kind of party or reception you'd like to have, pronounces your name right, plays the music you request, not the songs he feels like hearing. The DJ you should hire works out the songs ahead of time with you. Sean Stewart, DJ Truth, for all occasions, weddings, dances, graduations, anniversaries, and parties. 661-7658, 661-7658, 661-7658 for Sean Stewart, DJ Truth.
Checking in now with meteorologist Gary Best, who says today's nice, but tomorrow maybe not so much.
That's right. The fall is coming back. Even though we've got summer-like temperatures for today, Brian, this is only going to be just for today, and then it's back to reality with cooler temperatures and some clouds and showers for the rest of the week. So for today, increasing clouds, a chance of late-day showers, high temperature 85 degrees. Tonight, rather cloudy with a few showers, maybe a thunderstorm, low temperature, low 60s. Then we're stuck in the 60s all day Wednesday, between 64 and 68. Lots of clouds as well with a few scattered showers. Chance of showers for tomorrow night near 50, and mid-60s for the high temperature Thursday, mostly cloudy, breezy, again with a few scattered showers. It should become drier, though, for Friday and Saturday, but remain on the cool side. Brian?
Thank you, Gary. Back to Gary. We're on with Dr. Gary Ostrower. We just heard from meteorologist Gary Best. Dr. Ostrower, you talked about the Civil War talk in the last segment. There was a governor from New York State who went down to Washington for a position, I believe, during the Lincoln administration.
Well, it's a little bit before that. Let me kind of give you a little bit of
Seward we're talking about.
Yeah, a little bit of background here. The man we're talking about is William Seward. William Seward was one of the most important American politicians in the middle of the 19th century. He had been, for a period, a governor of New York State back in the 1840s, and then he switched to become a member of the U.S. Senate from about 1849 until 1861. He was a Republican. He was perhaps the leading Republican, maybe the most important single Republican in the United States Senate during that period. He had a friend who was kind of a political operative, a man who in some ways made it possible for him to win as many elections as he did. That man was a fellow by the name of Thurlow Weed. I love that name, Thurlow Weed. Both of them came from Auburn, and not all that far from here. So Weed remained, if you will, kind of the sort of the Karl Rove of his day. And William Seward, as I say, had been governor and then became a member of the U.S. Senate. And as a member of the U.S. Senate, he was a very, very vocal opponent of slavery. As a matter of fact, he said at one point back in the early 1850s when the Southerners were arguing that, hey, the law mandates slavery, the law justifies slavery, the law protects slavery. And Seward said, yes, there's a law. He said, there is a higher law, even higher than the American Constitution, than the U.S. Constitution. And he's referring, of course, to the moral law, to the biblical law. He was very much opponent of slavery. In 1860, Seward sought the presidency, same year that Abraham Lincoln sought the presidency, along with a few other people like Salmon Chase and about two other people who were, serious contenders for the presidency at that time. Seward had been a member of the Whig Party. And that Whig Party had lasted for approximately 20 years or so, maybe a little bit less than that. But in the 1850s, the Whig Party fell apart. And the reason it fell apart was because of the slavery issue. Southern Whigs went in one direction, Northern Whigs went in another direction. And so the party quite literally disappeared. And out of the ashes of the Whig Party would arise the Republican Party. And that is the Republican Party of Donald Trump. That is the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan. It's been around, in other words, for about 160 years or so. Be it as it may, the point I'm making here is that Seward became one of the leaders of that Whig Party, and he would use that platform to run for president in 1860. He lost. Lincoln, of course, won the nomination, and they were, I think it's fair to say, really, really powerful enemies, so to speak, certainly rivals. And what Lincoln did was to bring Seward into his own cabinet. There's a woman by the name of Doris Goodwin who has written a really, really good book about this called Team of Rivals. What Lincoln did to unify the country on the verge of the Civil War, with the likelihood that there might be an actual Civil War, is to bring in a number of these other Republicans who had opposed him for president, who had actually run, hoped to become president themselves, during the 1860 election. And so they became members of Lincoln's cabinet. Seward became the Secretary of State. And I think it's fair to say that he became the second most important Secretary of State, I think perhaps in American history. Among other things, as Secretary of State, we all remember that, he's going to become responsible for the purchase of Alaska from Russia. But more importantly, he kept European countries from aiding the Confederacy during the Civil War.
You're asking my next question, yeah.
And had those European countries, particularly Britain and France, had they supported the Confederacy, my guess is that, and there's no way of knowing this for sure, my hunch is that the South would have become a separate and independent country, and it would remain so to this very day. And that would have meant that slavery into the South would have remained intact, certainly through the end of the 19th century and probably well into the 20th century. It would have been a very, very sad state of affairs.
Now, Dr. Ostrower does all this from memory. I do it in Google searches. He had something to do with Catholic education, too, I believe.
I don't know that. You know something
well,
that I
I've
don't.
stumped you. Yeah, apparently, I think this is something he did in New York State, maybe nationally, had something to do with getting Catholic schools going.
Well, that it's possible. I really don't know that.
Was that around that time that they started?
Yeah, I mean, look,
you got the potato famine with all the Irish coming in.
Yeah, and there was a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment during that period. During the latter part of the 1840s and into the early 1850s, there were anti-Catholic riots by Protestants, the most important in Philadelphia, in Kensington area, Philadelphia, when a number of people were killed. And the reason was that the Catholics wanted certain prayers in the public schools, and the Protestant wanted their own prayers in the public schools. The prayers really didn't differ all that much, but when it comes to religion, people can feel very, very strongly, and they're unwilling to compromise. But I did want to say one other thing about Seward. As I say, I really don't know very much about the educational end of this. But in 1865, when Lincoln was assassinated, in April of 1865, the assassination plot, the assassination conspiracy, did not only target Lincoln. It also targeted a number of other officials, including Secretary of State William Seward. An assassin met him at his house, entered into his house, slashed him, tried to kill him. Seward was very, very seriously wounded. He would be disfigured around his face and his neck for the rest of his life, but he did survive the attack. It took about 4 or 5 months before he was back on his feet, so to speak, but it was a very, very close call. So Lincoln was the only one of those people who were targeted who was actually killed, but Seward almost met the same fate. And he remained, I might add, as Secretary of State from that point right until President Johnson, Lincoln's successor, Lincoln's vice president, that President Johnson left office in 1869.
What do you make of the, and I'm going longer than I should, but this is interesting. What do you make of those theories that when the, I think it was a barn was burned down, that it was not, there's a conspiracy theory that it was not John Wilkes Booth. What do you make of stories like that?
They're rubbish. Simply garbage. John Wilkes Booth killed Lincoln. We know exactly who is involved in that conspiracy. Most of those people were put on trial, including a woman named Mary Surratt, who was the person who owned the house in which many of the conspirators were meeting, and she was convicted as part of that conspiracy. She probably knew about it. I don't know that she was actively a conspirator, and she was executed, and a number of the others were executed as well. Not all of them were executed. I think the trials were fair. But so far as thinking that John Wilkes Booth somehow didn't have anything to do with that,
got away.
Yes, that is fantasy.
Somebody else died and he got away. Yeah.
It's like believing that that climate change is a Chinese hoax.
With that, we do have to go. Thank you as always, Dr. Ostrower.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.